A can of tuna looks simple. The label is not. Two cans can sit side by side on the same shelf and tell completely different stories: species, sodium, liquid, origin, mercury, and fishing claims. The problem is not buying tuna, it is buying without knowing what the label is really saying.
You know, you can really think of a tuna can a lot like a passport. That bright, colorful front label you see, that's just the name on the cover. It's totally designed to catch your eye when you're rushing down a crowded grocery aisle. But the small print on the back? That contains the actual travel history, the origin, and the exact contents. Too often, we're making our grocery choices based on price or just a familiar logo, and we're entirely missing the mechanisms right there on the package that tell us what kind of choice we're actually making.
And this disconnect between marketing and reality, well, it's a super common buying mistake. Let's take a brand like Genova, for instance. It presents this beautiful Italian aesthetic, it has premium pricing, and it heavily implies an artisan origin. But this front label illusion can be kind of misleading. That premium price doesn't necessarily guarantee artisan sourcing, because according to the source material in this explainer, the product still moves to the exact same opaque, large-scale global supply chains as many cheaper, mass-market brands. The Italian ownership is totally real, but the implication that the contents bypass global mass procurement, it just isn't supported by the brand's own supply chain disclosures.
So we could actually apply a physical check to the contents, specifically when we're talking about olive oil-packed tuna. You see, olive oil is highly susceptible to food adulteration. True extra virgin olive oil pours thick and green, and it visibly clings to the glass. If you drain your can and the liquid pours out thin and pale, well, it may deserve attention before you take a bite. Independent testing in the broader global market has repeatedly found that cheaper vegetable oil blends sometimes make their way into products labeled as olive oil, meaning you might be paying a premium for an entirely unverified ingredient.
This opacity actually extends into the broader grocery store landscape too, specifically with private label store brands like Market Pantry or Great Value. These massive retailers don't actually operate fishing vessels. Instead, they rotate their procurement contracts based on the absolute lowest price point for that specific quarter. So, the crucial takeaway here is that while the label sitting on your shelf stays identical month after month, year after year, the processing facility, the sourcing, and the species verification standards underneath can completely change. It all depends on who won the latest supply bid.
So how can we as consumers visually tell what's going on inside our food? Let me teach you what we'll call the liquid test. When you drain a can of properly processed single-species tuna, it yields a relatively clear, consistent brine. On the other hand, if you open a can and the liquid is cloudy, murky, or visibly inconsistent across different sections of the same can, that can differ because it often reflects multiple species. Species with varying fat and protein structures that have basically been processed and packed together. It's a physical detail a lot of people completely overlook, but your eyes can often read exactly what the label leaves out.
Now, this leads us directly into the structural risks of massive, self-audited supply chains in the global seafood market. When supply chains become deliberately opaque, serious issues can literally hide in plain sight. Take Thai Union, for example. They're the parent company of the deeply familiar Chicken of the Sea brand, and they faced a Pulitzer-winning investigation by the Associated Press that actually documented forced labor on vessels within their supply chains. When a massive corporation relies heavily on self-audits across a sprawling international network, verifying what actually happens miles offshore in the middle of the night becomes a really significant challenge.
And guys, brand familiarity definitely does not guarantee corporate integrity. Generations of American families have bought the same iconic cans without a second thought. Yet in 2019, major executives from dominant brands like Bumblebee and StarKist faced federal antitrust proceedings. We are talking about federal criminal convictions and a $100 million fine for secretly coordinating and fixing prices behind closed doors. So the companies were actively competing for your grocery dollar on the front end with cute cartoon mascots, while the price was already decided for you on the back end.
All right, let's talk about the actual fish itself. Independent researchers have utilized DNA testing across major canned tuna brands, and the results are pretty eye-opening. They flag significant species substitution across the category. What this means is researchers have actually found skipjack in cans explicitly labeled as albacore, and sometimes even unidentifiable species in cans simply labeled as light tuna. The science is super straightforward here. DNA sequencing doesn't lie about what's in the sample, but depending on the label, the printed words sometimes do.
Beyond the liquid, the physical structure of the fish offers another really vital clue: the texture test. Real solid white albacore maintains a consistent, firm grain. The muscle fibers run uniformly in a clear direction. But if you press a fork into a can and experience unexpected texture shifts, where some sections hold remarkably firm while sitting directly next to sections that dissolve almost immediately, that inconsistency is worth checking. It often indicates that multiple species with entirely different tissue densities were processed together under the exact same conditions.
Now, of course, there are brands actively addressing specific consumer health concerns. Safe Catch Elite, for example, offers a highly meaningful and independently verifiable safety commitment. They test every single individual fish for mercury before it goes into a can. And I mean individual testing, not just batch testing. This is an incredibly important standard for vulnerable populations, like pregnant women or individuals managing specific medical treatments, where mercury exposure is an immediate, serious, and primary consideration.
But here is where we have to be incredibly careful of the health halo effect. A consumer might trust that mercury promise so much that they simply stop reading the rest of the label. And in doing so, they might inadvertently expose themselves to meaningfully higher sodium levels. For individuals managing blood pressure or fluid retention, sodium is a primary concern. The marketing loudly highlights the vital mercury testing, but the elevated sodium content remains a much quieter reality on the back panel. And that proves exactly why you must read the entire label every single time.
So what does true traceability actually look like in the tuna aisle? Well, American Tuna is a prime example. They utilize family-owned boats catching albacore right off the U.S. Pacific coast. There is full traceability from a specific ocean region directly to the can, operating entirely under domestic regulatory oversight. There's no sprawling, opaque international journey through anonymous brokers and third-party transit facilities. The supply chain accountability is structural, it's verifiable, and it's visibly printed right there on the can.
Another critical factor to look out for is the actual fishing method. Let's look at the term pole and line caught. This is a method utilized by brands like Wild Planet, and it's a highly selective commercial fishing method where literally one fish is caught at a time. Why does this matter? Well, it prevents the mixing of unintended species, which is known as bycatch, that frequently occurs with massive industrial net fishing. It is slower, sure, and more expensive and less scalable, but it ensures that what is written on the can is the only thing inside the can.
And this commitment to purity is often reflected right on the ingredient panel. Honestly sourced and processed tuna really needs exactly two things: tuna and sea salt. When you look at other labels, you'll often find added water, broths, or hidden fillers. These are sometimes used to artificially boost the apparent weight of the fish and strategically inflate the protein numbers on the label. So a minimalist ingredient panel is a very strong indicator of a product that hasn't been overly engineered just to hit a lower price point.
Okay, let's turn all of this into an actionable, easy-to-remember supermarket checklist for your next grocery run. Step 1, flip the can. Do not buy based on the front cover marketing alone. Step 2, verify the species, looking for independent third-party DNA testing if possible. Step 3, check the sodium levels on the back, and look at the liquid once you open it at home. And step 4, look for named fisheries and documented catch regions. You want to make your purchasing decisions based on verifiable facts.
Ultimately, the final question is, what is your label really saying? Look, the goal here in this explainer isn't to avoid canned tuna entirely. It remains an accessible, highly nutritious protein from millions of families. The goal is to simply buy with your eyes wide open. Always flip the can, vary your seafood choices to balance your nutritional intake, pay close attention to species and sodium levels, and as always, consult a qualified professional for personal dietary guidance when needed. Read the passport, know what you're buying, and you'll make the best choice for you.